Nobody knew the night nurse was Army Ranger until armed Billionaire stormed the hospital ward. The standoff. The fluorescent lights of St. Jude's Memorial Hospital hummed with a sterile white noise that usually signaled safety, but tonight, the air in the pediatric wing was thick with the suffocating weight of panic. It was 2 a.m. The corridors, typically quiet zones of healing, had transformed into a theater of terror. The double doors at the end of the West Wing didn't just open, they were kicked inward with a violence that shattered the magnetic locks. Julian Thorne had arrived. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and fury, standing 6'4", with a jawline sharp enough to cut glass and short dark brown hair that bristled with aggression. Julian was the embodiment of dangerous power. He was dressed in a dark charcoal, slim-fit suit that likely cost more than the combined annual salaries of the nursing staff. His white dress shirt crisp against his chest, a luxury silk tie knotted with precision. But the image of corporate perfection was shattered by what he held in his hands. His knuckles were white, gripping a matte black AR-15 assault rifle in a textbook two-handed tactical hold. "Get away from him!" Julian roared. His voice wasn't just loud, it was a guttural command that shook the walls. "I said, get away from my son." The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Trays crashed to the linoleum floor. 2 doctors in white coats threw themselves behind the reception desk. A group of nurses near the medication cart dropped to their knees, hands interlocked behind their heads, sobbing into the floor tiles. They were civilians in the face of a god of war. Julian marched down the center of the hallway, the weapon raised, sweeping the area. His eyes were wide, frantic, bloodshot, the eyes of a father who had been pushed past the brink of sanity. He had received the call 10 minutes ago. Administrative discharge protocols initiated, palliative care only. They were giving up on Leo. They were letting his boy die because the insurance algorithms said the case was hopeless. "I buy and sell countries," Julian screamed, sweat beading on his forehead, his polished black leather shoes slamming against the floor. "You think you can unplug my son? I will burn this building to the ground with all of you inside." He stopped in front of room 402. The entire wing was paralyzed. Security was minutes away, but death was seconds away, except for one person. To Julian's right, standing near a mobile vital signs monitor, was the night nurse. She wasn't cowering. She wasn't crying. Sarah Sarge Jenkins stood perfectly still. Her blue scrubs were wrinkled from a 12-hour shift, her blonde hair pulled back in a practical, messy ponytail. She held a large, transparent medical bag in her left hand. While her colleagues were hyperventilating on the floor, Sarah's breathing was rhythmic, controlled. In, 2, 3, out, 2, 3. She wasn't looking at the exit. She was looking at Julian's trigger finger. She saw what the others couldn't. She saw the trembling in his deltoids, not from the weight of the rifle, but from adrenaline overload. She saw the dilation of his pupils. She saw that the safety on the rifle was off, but his finger was hovering outside the trigger guard. He didn't want to kill anyone. He wanted to save someone. The hallway was deadly silent, save for the whimpering of a young intern on the floor. "You!" Julian barked, swinging the barrel toward Sarah. "Open the door. Get the equipment. We are leaving." Now. Most people would have fainted. Sarah didn't blink. She slowly set the medical bag down on the cart. She raised her hands, palms open, not in surrender, but in a universal gesture of calm. "I can't do that, Mr. Thorne," Sarah said. Her voice was shockingly low, steady, and devoid of fear. It cut through the tension like a razor. "Do you know who I am?" Julian took a step closer, the barrel of the weapon inches from her chest. "I will end you. I know who you are," Sarah replied, her eyes locking onto his intense, angry gaze. "You're a father, and you're terrified." The air left the room. Julian froze. The anger in his face flickered, replaced for a microsecond by agonizing vulnerability, before the rage slammed back into place. "Don't psychoanalyze me," he shouted, the vein in his neck pulsing. They're killing him. They stopped the treatment. They followed a protocol, Sarah said, taking one deliberate step toward the gun. The other nurses gasped. But I don't follow protocols when a patient is in danger. I follow the mission. Julian stared at her. She wasn't trembling. She was looking at the weapon with the familiarity of a mechanic looking at a wrench. Your weapon is hot, Mr. Thorne, she said softly. Safety is off. You're shaking. If you discharge a round in here, the ricochet off these tile walls could hit room 402. It could hit Leo. The mention of his son's name hit Julian harder than a bullet. He glanced at the door of room 402, then back at the woman. I won't let them hurt him, Julian whispered, his voice cracking. I know, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a tone she hadn't used since her tours in the Middle East, the voice used to calm panicked soldiers in the middle of a firefight. I'm not going to let them hurt him either, but if the SWAT team breaches those doors behind you and sees that rifle raised, you won't be able to protect Leo. You'll be dead or in prison. And Leo will be alone. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. Blue and red lights began to flash against the windows at the end of the hall. Give me the weapon, Julian, she said, using his first name. It was a breach of etiquette, but a necessary tactical maneuver to humanize the moment. I can't, he choked out. I can't trust them. Trust me, Sarah said. She reached out slowly and placed her hand on the barrel of the AR-15. The metal was cold. Her hand was warm. I'm the night nurse. On my watch, nobody gets left behind. Look at me. He looked. He saw eyes that had seen worse things than a hospital hallway. He saw a resolve that matched his own. Julian Thorne, the billionaire who could topple governments, crumbled. His shoulders slumped. He released the grip. Sarah took the heavy weapon, flipped the safety on with a practiced, audible click that echoed in the silence, and ejected the magazine in one fluid motion, placing the rifle on the medical cart. Go to your son, she commanded gently. Julian didn't wait. He ripped the door to room 402 open and vanished inside, collapsing by the bedside of his pale, unconscious boy. Seconds later, the SWAT team burst through the double doors, screaming commands. They found a hallway of terrified staff, a billionaire weeping over his child, and a blonde nurse standing calmly by a cart, charting patient vitals as if nothing had happened. The investigation and the bond. 72 hours later, the silence at the Thorne estate was heavier than the silence at the hospital. Julian sat in his study, a room of mahogany and leather that smelled of expensive scotch and old money. The incident at St. Jude's had been scrubbed from the news cycle. Julian's lawyers were sharks, and a generous donation to the hospital's new cancer wing had bought their silence. But the ban remained. Julian was not allowed on the premises. Leo had been discharged into home hospice care against medical advice. Julian had brought him home to die, or so the doctors thought. Julian refused to accept it. He had set up a fully functional ICU in the east wing of the mansion. He had the best equipment money could buy. What he didn't have was someone he could trust to operate it. The agency nurses he had hired were terrified of him. They flinched when he walked in. They treated Leo like a fragile porcelain doll, too afraid to touch him, too clinical to comfort him. Julian stared at the security footage from the hospital on his laptop. He rewound the video again. He watched the blonde nurse. He watched how she stepped toward the gun. He zoomed in on her hands as she cleared the weapon. Muscle memory, he thought. That wasn't a civilian move. He picked up his phone. Find her, he told his head of security. The night nurse, Sarah Jenkins. Bring her here. Offer her whatever she wants. Double it. Sarah arrived at the Thorne estate in a beat-up Honda Civic that rattled as it idled at the massive iron gates. The contrast was laughable. The estate was a fortress of stone and manicured hedges, a place designed to keep the world out. She needed this job. Her veteran's pension barely covered her rent, and her former squadmate Rodriguez needed a specialized surgery that the VA was delaying. The sum Julian Thorne offered was life-changing. She was escorted into the main hall. It was like walking into a mausoleum, cold marble floors, vaulted ceilings, and an emptiness that echoed. Julian was waiting for her at the top of the grand staircase. He looked different than he had at the hospital, controlled, buttoned up, his charcoal suit replaced by a black turtleneck and slacks. But the intensity was the same. "Ms. Jenkins," he said, descending the stairs. He didn't offer a handshake. "You didn't press charges. You were a father having the worst night of his life, Mr. Thorne," Sarah replied, standing at ease, her hands clasped behind her back. "I didn't see a criminal. I saw a crisis." Julian stopped on the last step, studying her. "You handled that weapon like a pro." "I grew up on a farm in Texas," she lied smoothly. "We learned to shoot early." Julian narrowed his eyes. He didn't buy it, but he didn't press. "My son is in the East Wing. He's 6 years old. He hasn't spoken in 8 months. He has an autoimmune condition that the doctors can't name. He rejects food. He rejects meds. If he doesn't stabilize, he won't make it to the end of the month." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I don't need a nurse who follows protocol, Sarah. I need someone who won't break when things get hard. Are you that person?" "Show me the boy," was all she said. The nursery, now a medical bay, was filled with the beeping of machines. In the center of a massive bed lay Leo. He was tiny, pale, his skin almost translucent. He looked lost in the sea of luxury bedding. Sarah approached the bed. She didn't check the monitors first. She didn't check the charts. She looked at the boy. Leo's eyes were open, wide and fearful. He shrank back against the pillows as she approached. "Hey there, trooper," Sarah whispered. She didn't use the high-pitched baby voice that adults often use. She spoke to him like a person. She knelt by the bed so she was at eye level. "My name is Sarah. I hear you're fighting a pretty big battle here." Leo stared at her. He didn't move. "I'm here to watch your 6, she said softly. "That means I've got your back. Nobody gets to poke you or prod you without getting through me first. Deal?" Leo blinked. It was a small movement, but it was contact. Over the next 2 weeks, the atmosphere in the Thorne mansion began to shift. It was subtle at first, like the first thaw of winter. Julian, consumed by his work and his grief, watched from the shadows. He had installed high-definition cameras in Leo's room, ostensibly to monitor his health, but in reality he found himself glued to the feed, mesmerized by the magic Sarah was working. He saw the routine. Sarah didn't force the medication. She turned it into a mission. "All right, Leo," Julian heard her say through the monitor one evening. "Target is the nasty bacteria. The medicine is the reinforcements. We need to clear the LZ, open up." And Leo, the boy who had spit out medicine for 3 previous nurses, opened his mouth. But it was the nights that broke Julian's heart and mended it simultaneously. Leo suffered from night terrors. He would wake up screaming silently, his mouth open, tears streaming down his face, his heart rate spiking on the monitors. One night, Julian rushed to the room, ready to intervene, but he stopped at the slightly ajar door. Sarah was already there. She wasn't sedating him. She had scooped the frail boy out of the bed and was sitting in the rocking chair, holding him tight against her chest. She was rocking him rhythmically, a slow, steady cadence. She was humming. It was a low, haunting melody, not a nursery rhyme, but an old folk song. "The sun's going down, the stars are coming out, nothing can touch you. Not here, not now." Julian watched as his son's small hand gripped Sarah's scrub top. He watched the tension leave Leo's body. He saw Leo bury his face in her neck, seeking comfort, finding safety. For the first time in 2 years, Julian felt a lump in his throat. He looked at his own hands, hands that signed billion-dollar contracts, hands that had held a rifle in a hospital hallway. They felt useless. He couldn't provide that warmth. He was ice. She was fire. He leaned his head against the doorframe, a strange mixture of jealousy and profound gratitude washing over him. He had hired an employee, but he was beginning to realize he had brought something far more dangerous into his home. hope. The next morning, the dynamic changed. Julian entered the room while Sarah was adjusting Leo's pillows. "His fever is down," Sarah reported without turning around. "He ate half a bowl of oatmeal. It's a win." "Sarah," Julian said. She turned. For the first time, Julian wasn't looking at her as a subordinate. He was looking at her with a terrifying intensity. "Thank you," he said. The words felt foreign in his mouth. "Don't thank me yet, boss," Sarah said, a small, tired smile touching her lips. "We're not out of the woods, but we're holding the line." Julian nodded. As he walked away, he realized he wasn't just worried about Leo anymore. He found himself wondering about the woman who slept in the guest room down the hall. The woman with the sad eyes and the reflexes of a soldier who was slowly turning his house back into a home. But peace at the Thorn estate was a fragile thing, and neither of them knew that the real enemy wasn't the disease. It was about to pull up in a limousine at the front gate. The sabotage and the separation. The peace at the Thorn estate was shattered not by a scream, but by the click of high heels on marble. Victoria St. Clair had returned. She swept into the foyer like a cold front, surrounded by a mountain of Louis Vuitton luggage and an entourage of assistants. She was stunning, in a predatory way. Sharp cheekbones, platinum hair, and eyes that assessed the value of everything they touched. She had been in Paris for Fashion Week, a convenient excuse to avoid the messy reality of Julian's sick child. "Julian, darling." Her voice was shrill, shattering the quiet atmosphere Sarah had worked so hard to cultivate. She threw her arms around him, but her eyes were already scanning the room. They landed on Sarah, who was standing at the top of the stairs, holding a tray of empty medicine vials. "And who," Victoria asked, her nose wrinkling slightly, "is the help?" "That's Sarah," Julian said, extricating himself from her embrace. He looked tired, but for the first time in months, he didn't look hopeless. "She's Leo's nurse. She's doing miracles, Victoria." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. She climbed the stairs, brushing past Sarah with a deliberate shoulder check. "We'll see about that. I don't trust strangers with our family matters." Over the next 3 days, the atmosphere in the house grew toxic. Victoria was a master of subtle warfare. She would criticize Sarah's uniform, question her hygiene, and undermine her authority in front of the staff. But what infuriated Victoria most was Leo. When Victoria entered the nursery, wearing heavy perfume that made the boy cough, Leo would shrink away. He wouldn't look at her. But when Sarah walked in, wearing her plain blue scrubs, Leo's face would light up. He would reach for her hand. He would make small, quiet sounds, the precursors to speech. Victoria saw this, and she hated it. It wasn't just jealousy, it was a threat to her position. If Julian saw that this nobody could do what she couldn't, love his son, her engagement ring was as good as gone. The sabotage began on a Tuesday evening. Julian was hosting a private dinner for his board of directors downstairs. He needed everything to be perfect. Victoria had promised to check on Leo so Julian could focus on business. Upstairs, Sarah was in the staff kitchen preparing Leo's evening formula. She had left her medical bag in the nursery, a breach of her own protocol, but she had stepped out for only 2 minutes. Victoria slipped into the nursery. She moved with the silence of a viper. She opened the drawer where the high-potency sedatives were kept, locked usually, but she had swiped the keycard from Julian's desk. She didn't poison the boy. She wasn't that foolish. Instead, she took a bottle of sedatives and hid it in the pocket of Sarah's spare cardigan hanging on the chair. Then she unclasped her diamond Patek Philippe watch, worth $50,000, and dropped it deep into Sarah's medical bag. She waited until 9 p.m. Julian came upstairs to say goodnight to Leo after the guests had left. He found Victoria pacing the hallway, fake tears streaming down her face. "Julian, thank God!" she gasped. "I went to check on Leo. He's unresponsive. He won't wake up. And my watch, it's gone. I left it on the nightstand for 2 seconds." Panic, cold and sharp, seized Julian's chest. He burst into the room. Leo was in a deep, heavy sleep, his breathing shallow. "Leo." Julian shook the boy gently. "Leo, wake up!" The boy was limp. "What did she give him?" Victoria shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at Sarah, who had just entered the room with a fresh blanket. "She's been drugging him so she doesn't have to deal with him. Look at him, Julian, he's overdosed." "What are you talking about?" Sarah asked, her voice calm but her eyes narrowing. She stepped forward to check Leo's pulse. "Don't touch him!" Julian roared. The fear for his son had instantly reverted him to the man who stormed the hospital with a rifle. "Get away from him!" "Julian, check her bag," Victoria sobbed. "I saw her putting things in there earlier. I didn't think... Oh God, my poor Leo." Julian grabbed Sarah's medical bag. He dumped the contents onto the floor. Syringes, gauze, a stethoscope, and the diamond watch. It clattered loudly against the hardwood. The silence that followed was deafening. Julian looked at the watch, then at Sarah. His face went pale, then red with betrayal. He walked over to Sarah's cardigan and ripped it off the chair. He felt the pocket. He pulled out the bottle of sedatives. "Explain this," Julian hissed, shaking the bottle in her face. "You're stealing from me, and you're drugging my son to keep him quiet." "I didn't take that watch," Sarah said, her voice steady, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. She looked at Victoria, who was smirking behind her hands. "And I never administer sedatives without logging them. Check the logs." "The logs you write?" Julian laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You played me. I let you into my home. I let you hold my son." "Julian, look at the vitals," Sarah tried to reason, pointing to the monitor. "He's not overdosed. His heart rate is steady. He's just exhausted from therapy." "Get out," Julian whispered. "Mr. Thorne, if I leave now, his routine will break. He will regress." "Get out," Julian screamed, the sound echoing through the mansion. "Before I call the police and have you thrown in a cell, you have 5 minutes." Sarah looked at Julian. She saw a man blinded by trauma, manipulated by fear. She looked at Leo, sleeping peacefully, unaware that his protector was being banished. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She was a ranger. She knew when a position was overrun. She simply nodded, picked up her bag, leaving the watch on the floor, and walked out. As the heavy front door slammed shut behind her, the rain began to fall. Inside the nursery, Leo's eyes fluttered open. He looked at the chair where Sarah usually sat. It was empty. He looked at his father, who was shaking with rage. Leo opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. His face contorted in pure, silent terror. The crisis and the truth, the collapse, was immediate. It wasn't a gradual decline. It was a free fall. Within 6 hours of Sarah's departure, the Thorne estate had descended into chaos. Leo had woken up fully at 2 a.m. When he realized Sarah wasn't there, when the familiar scent of her lavender soap and the hum of her lullaby were replaced by the cloying smell of Victoria's perfume, he panicked. The panic triggered a physiological cascade. His cortisol levels spiked, sending his fragile immune system into shock. He began to vomit. He refused water. He thrashed in the bed, tearing out his IV line. Blood stained the expensive silk sheets. Julian called the agency. They sent 2 emergency nurses. Leo bit one of them and kicked the other. He was fighting like a cornered animal. By the next morning, the silence in the house was replaced by the constant shrill alarm of the heart monitor. Beep, 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 beep. Julian stood by the window in the hallway, looking out at the grey, relentless rain. He hadn't slept. He looked 10 years older. Victoria was in the guest room, complaining about a migraine, utterly useless in the face of the crisis. "Mr. Thorne," one of the agency nurses said, stepping out of the room. She looked frazzled. We can't get his fever down. It's spiking to 104. He's rejecting the oral meds. We need to transport him to the hospital. No hospital, Julian snapped. They'll just put him in palliative care. Do your job. We can't, the nurse shot back, losing her professional cool. He's terrified. He keeps pointing at the door. He wants her. Julian flinched. He walked into the nursery. The room felt cold. He looked at the chair where Sarah used to sit. Underneath it, half hidden by the rug, was a small, leather-bound notebook. It must have fallen out of her scrub pocket when he ripped the cardigan away. He picked it up. He expected to find ramblings of a madwoman, or maybe calculations of what she could steal. He opened it. The first page wasn't words. It was a sketch, a beautiful, detailed charcoal sketch of Leo sleeping. The caption read, "Target acquired, the most beautiful boy in the world." Julian turned the page. Day 3. Leo likes the blue spoon, not the red one. The red one scares him. Remember to warm the applesauce for exactly 15 seconds. Day 7. He smiled today. I almost cried. Don't let him see you cry, Sarge. Stay strong for him. Day 12. I think he understands me. He's not broken, just trapped. We're going to get him out. I promise, little man. I won't leave you. Julian's hands began to tremble. These weren't the notes of a thief or a drug addict. They were the field notes of a guardian. They were love letters to a child that wasn't hers. He flipped to the back of the book. Tucked into the pocket was a folded piece of paper. It was a letter from the Department of Defense, a discharge summary. But the words didn't match what Victoria had told him. Honorary discharge. Medical retirement. Reason, critical injuries sustained while shielding a civilian child during an ambush in Kandahar. Awards, Silver Star, Purple Heart. Julian felt the room spin. He dropped onto the chair. A Silver Star. She was a war hero, a woman who had taken a bullet to save a child she didn't know, and he had accused her of stealing a watch. He pulled out his phone. His fingers fumbled as he dialed a number he hadn't used in years, General Marcus Vance, an old contact from his defense contracting days. "Thorne?" the general's gruff voice answered. "It's been a while." "Marcus?" Julian's voice was ragged. "I need you to run a name for me, Sarah Jenkins, Army Ranger medic." There was a pause on the line. Then the general's tone shifted from casual to reverent. "Sergeant Jenkins? Is she working for you?" "She was." "You're lucky, son," Vance said. "That woman is a legend. Best combat medic I ever saw. She walked through a minefield, literally a minefield, to get to a wounded private. Why are you asking?" "I was told she was unstable, discharged for mental issues." "Unstable?" Vance laughed, a dry, angry sound. "Whoever told you that is a liar. She retired to take care of her dying mother. She spent every dime of her combat pay on her mum's chemo. She's the most disciplined operator I know. If you have her, you keep her, Julian. You hear me?" Julian hung up. The phone felt like a brick in his hand. He stood up and walked to the security console on the wall. He hadn't checked the footage from yesterday because he was so sure of what he had seen. But now, he pulled up the timestamp, 8:45 p.m. On the screen, the nursery was empty. Then the door opened. Victoria walked in. She looked around. She opened the drawer. She took the meds. She put them in Sarah's sweater. She unclasped her watch. She dropped it in the bag. She looked directly at the camera and smirked, a chilling, triumphant expression. The rage that filled Julian now was different from the rage at the hospital. That was hot, chaotic fire. This was cold, absolute zero. It was the clarity of a man who realizes he has destroyed the only thing that could save his son. "Mr. Thorne!" the agency nurse screamed from the room. "He's seizing!" Julian ran into the room. Leo was convulsing on the bed. His skin was grey. "Call the ambulance!" the nurse yelled. No, Julian said. He grabbed his car keys. Keep him stable. Do whatever you have to do. Where are you going? I'm going to get the only person who can fix this. Julian ran out of the mansion. He didn't take the limousine. He jumped into his Aston Martin, the engine roaring to life like a beast waking up. He drove through the gates, shattering the speed limit, drifting onto the wet highway. He knew where she lived. It was in her file, the address in the slums, the place she lived so she could pay for her friend's surgery. He drove like a madman, the rain lashing against the windshield, the image of Sarah's face, calm, hurt and disappointed, burned into his mind. He prayed to a God he hadn't believed in for years. Don't let me be too late, please, don't let me be too late. The car screeched to a halt in front of a dilapidated apartment complex. Julian didn't wait for an umbrella. He sprinted up the broken concrete stairs, his expensive suit soaking through instantly. He pounded on door 3B. No answer. He pounded again. "Sarah! Sarah, please!" The door opened, but it wasn't Sarah. It was a landlady with curlers in her hair. "She ain't here," the woman grunted. "She packed up an hour ago, said she was catching a bus to Ohio, leaving for good." "Which bus station?" Julian grabbed the woman's shoulders, his eyes wild. "Which station?" "Downtown, the Greyhound terminal. Hey, watch the suit, buddy." Julian was already gone. He leaped down the stairs, 3 at a time. The Greyhound station was 20 minutes away across town. He had 10 minutes before the last bus left. He got back in the car. He floored it. "I'm coming, Leo," he thought. "Hold on." The redemption and the new beginning. The Greyhound bus terminal was a purgatory of fluorescent lights, smell of diesel fumes, and the collective misery of people trying to escape their lives. Sarah stood in line at gate 4. She was soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her forehead. She wore a cheap grey hoodie and jeans, clutching a duffel bag that contained everything she owned. She looked at her ticket. One way to Ohio. Boarding for Columbus, Canton, and Cleveland. The PA system crackled. Sarah stepped forward. Her heart felt like a lead weight in her chest. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to turn around, to go back to the boy who needed her. But the soldier in her knew the chain of command. She had been relieved of duty. The mission was scrubbed. She handed her ticket to the driver. He tore it. She placed her foot on the first step of the bus. "Sarah!" The scream tore through the noise of the idling engines. It didn't sound like a billionaire. It sounded like a desperate animal. Sarah froze. She turned. Julian Thorne was sprinting across the wet asphalt of the loading bay. He was a wreck. His tailored suit was ruined, mud splattered up his legs, his tie undone, his chest heaving. Security guards were chasing him, shouting for him to stop, but he plowed through them like a linebacker. He reached the bus just as the driver started to close the pneumatic doors. Julian jammed his arm into the gap, forcing the doors back open with a grunt of pain. "Hey, you can't be back here," the driver yelled. Julian ignored him. He looked up at Sarah. He was breathless, raindrops dripping from his nose and chin. "Don't go," he gasped. Sarah looked down at him, her expression guarded. "Mr. Thorne, you made your position very clear. I'm not a thief." "I know," Julian said. He reached into his soaked jacket pocket and pulled out the small, leather-bound notebook. "I found this." Sarah's eyes widened. She reached for it instinctively. "That's private." "I read it," Julian said, his voice breaking. "I saw the sketches. I read what you wrote about him. Target acquired." He looked her dead in the eye. "You love him." Sarah's lip trembled. She tightened her grip on the handrail. "He's a good kid. He deserves better than what he's getting." "He deserves you," Julian said. He dropped to his knees right there on the dirty, oil-stained concrete. The other passengers stared. The billionaire was kneeling in the slush. "I saw the tape, Sarah. I saw Victoria plant the watch. I was a fool. I was blind and arrogant, and I almost killed my son because I was too proud to trust the one person who actually cared." "Get up, Julian," she whispered, looking around. "No," he said firmly. "Not until you hear me." I called General Vance. I know about Kandahar. I know about the Silver Star. Sarah flinched as if he had slapped her. I don't use that title anymore. You are a hero, Julian said, his voice fierce. You ran into a minefield for a stranger. Please, I am begging you, run into the fire one more time. Not for me, for Leo. He's seizing. The ambulance is too far out. He's dying, Sarah. The word hung in the air between them. Dying. The mask of the civilian nurse dropped. The eyes of the ranger returned. The sadness vanished, replaced by cold, hard calculation. Sarah threw her duffel bag onto the wet pavement. She jumped off the bus steps, landing in front of Julian. "Where is the car?" she barked. "Out front, double parked." "Move!" she commanded. "Drive fast. Don't speak unless I ask for intel." They ran together, not as employer and employee, but as a unit. The drive back was a blur of speed and terror. Julian drove the Aston Martin like a weapon, weaving through traffic at 100 miles an hour. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, not flinching at the near misses. She was on the phone with the agency nurse back at the mansion. "Put him on his side!" Sarah shouted into the phone. "Do not restrain him! Time the seizure! How long? How long?" She listened, her face pale. 4 minutes. If he hits 5, he's in status epilepticus. His brain will start to fry. Listen to me. Do you have the diastat? Good. Administer it rectally now. She hung up and looked at Julian. Faster. I'm doing 110. Do 130. They skidded through the iron gates of the estate, tearing up the gravel driveway. The car hadn't even fully stopped before Sarah kicked the door open and sprinted toward the house. She burst through the front doors, Julian right behind her. The sound of screaming filled the house. Not Leo, Victoria. He stopped breathing. Oh my God, he's blue! Victoria was standing in the hallway, screeching uselessly. Sarah didn't even look at her. She shoulder-checked Victoria into the wall with enough force to knock the wind out of her and stormed into the nursery. The scene was critical. The agency nurse was crying in the corner. Leo was on the bed, still, his skin a terrifying shade of grey-blue. His lips were purple. "Respiratory arrest," Sarah announced. It wasn't a question. "Get out of my way." She leaped onto the bed, straddling the boy's small body. She placed 2 fingers on his carotid artery. "Thready pulse. He's hypoxic." "What do we do?" Julian asked, standing at the foot of the bed, helpless. "You!" Sarah pointed at him without looking up. "I need the crash bag from the closet, the red one, now!" Julian scrambled to the closet and threw the bag to her. Sarah caught it mid-air. She ripped it open. She didn't look like a nurse anymore. She looked like a mechanic working on an engine that was about to explode. She pulled out a pediatric bag valve mask. She tilted Leo's head back, lifting his chin to open the airway. She sealed the mask over his face and began to squeeze the bag. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release. "Come on, soldier," she grunted, sweat dripping down her face. "Don't you quit on me. We don't quit. Breathe." 1 minute passed. The only sound was the rhythmic whoosh of the airbag and the beep of the heart monitor, which was alarmingly slow. "He's not oxygenating," Sarah said. "Airway is compromised. His throat is closing up from the allergic reaction to the sedative. I have to intubate." "Here?" the agency nurse gasped. "You can't intubate without a doctor. It's illegal." "I am a combat medic, 75th Ranger Regiment," Sarah snarled, not breaking her rhythm. "I have intubated men in the back of a burning Blackhawk with a plastic straw. I am intubating this child." She grabbed the laryngoscope. She moved with terrifying precision. She opened Leo's mouth, inserted the blade, and visualized the cords. "Julian, hold his head. Don't let him move." Julian froze. "Move, soldier!" she screamed. Julian jumped forward, grabbing his son's head with trembling hands. "I got him." "Tube going in," Sarah whispered. She guided the plastic tube down the throat. "I'm in. Bag him." She attached the bag to the tube and squeezed. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the chest rose. The monitor beeped faster. Beep, beep, beep. The color began to return to Leo's cheeks. The gray faded to pink. His oxygen saturation on the monitor climbed. 70%, 85%, 98%. Sarah slumped back on her heels, exhaling a breath she felt she had been holding for years. She checked his pupils. They reacted. "He's stable," she whispered. She brushed a damp lock of hair off Leo's forehead. "He's back." Julian let go of his son's head. He looked at the woman sitting on the bed, her hands covered in medical gel, her hoodie soaked, looking more beautiful and powerful than anything he had ever seen. He fell to his knees beside the bed and buried his face in the mattress, sobbing uncontrollably. Sarah reached out and placed a hand on Julian's head. "It's okay, Dad. He's safe. Zone is clear." An hour later, the ambulance had come and gone. The paramedics, upon seeing Sarah's handiwork, had agreed that moving him now would be more dangerous than letting him rest. They set up additional fluids and left, giving Sarah a respectful nod. The house was quiet again. Leo was sleeping deeply, this time a natural sleep. Sarah stood by the window, drying her hands on a towel. She heard the click of heels. Victoria was standing in the doorway of the nursery. Her makeup was smeared, but her arrogance was intact. "Well," Victoria sniffed, "that was dramatic. I suppose you expect a bonus for doing your job." Sarah didn't turn around. She didn't have to. "Victoria!" A voice came from the shadows. Julian stepped out. He had changed into fresh clothes, but his face was hard as stone. He held an iPad in his hand. "Julian, darling," Victoria started, walking toward him. "That woman assaulted me. She pushed me. And the way she spoke to you." Julian turned the iPad screen toward her. It was the footage of the nursery from the night before, the footage of the watch, the footage of the sabotage. Victoria stopped, her face drained of color. Julian, I can explain," she stammered. I was testing her to see if she was trustworthy." "You risked my son's life," Julian said. His voice was terrifyingly quiet. "To win an argument." He walked over to her. He towered over her. "You have 10 minutes to pack your things. My security team is waiting downstairs. If you are not out of this house in 10 minutes, I will have you arrested for attempted manslaughter and child endangerment, and I will spend every penny I have ensuring you die in a prison cell." "You can't do that," Victoria shrieked. "I'm your fiancé." Julian looked at his hand. He took off the engagement ring he had been wearing, a simple band, and threw it into the trash can. "Get out!" Victoria looked at him, then at Sarah. She saw the united front. She saw that she had lost. She spun on her heel and fled. Julian walked over to Sarah. He stood next to her, looking down at Leo. "You saved him," he said. "Twice." "He's a fighter," Sarah said. "He just needed a spotter." "Sarah," Julian turned to her. He took her hands. They were rough, calloused, scarred, the hands of a worker, a soldier. He held them like they were made of glass. "I can't pay you enough for this. I know that now." "I don't want your money, Julian," she said softly. "I know," he said, "but I have a proposition, not a job offer." He looked at Leo, then back at her. "Stay," he said, "not as a nurse. Stay as family. We need you. I need you. Leo needs a mother, and God help me, I think I need a partner who can tell me when I'm being an idiot." Sarah looked at the billionaire. The anger was gone from his eyes. All that was left was hope. She looked at Leo. She remembered the nights rocking him. She remembered the loneliness of her apartment. "The mission isn't over yet," she smiled, a genuine warm smile that lit up the room. "I guess I'd better stay on patrol." Epilogue. 1 year later. The sun was shining over the Thorne estate, but the atmosphere was entirely different. The cold, museum-like silence was gone. The garden was filled with the sound of laughter. It was Leo's 7th birthday party. The lawn was filled with kids. Not just rich socialite children, but kids from the local school, kids from the hospital ward where Sarah used to work. There was a bouncy castle. There was a clown. Julian stood on the terrace, holding a glass of lemonade. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing jeans and a polo shirt. He looked younger, lighter. "Daddy! Daddy! Watch this!" Julian looked down. Leo came sprinting across the grass. He was healthy, his cheeks rosy, his legs strong. He wasn't mute anymore. He was the loudest kid at the party. "I'm watching, buddy," Julian called out. Leo did a clumsy cartwheel, landing on his butt, and burst into laughter. A pair of arms wrapped around Julian's waist from behind. He leaned back into the embrace. "Form needs work," Sarah said, resting her chin on his shoulder, "but the enthusiasm is a 10 out of 10. Julian turned around and kissed his wife. Sarah looked radiant. She wasn't wearing scrubs. She was wearing a simple summer dress, her hair loose. But around her neck, on a thin gold chain, she wore 2 things: a diamond locket with Leo's picture and a small, tarnished dog tag. "He's happy," Julian said, looking at their son. "You did that." "We did that," Sarah corrected him. She tightened her arms around him. "We held the line." Julian smiled, watching his son run back toward the cake. He looked at the woman who had stormed his life with the same ferocity she had stormed the battlefield. "Copy that, Sarge," he whispered. "Mission accomplished." End of story.